Daniel, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Scott, for having me. Very excited to talk to you.
It's so interesting. You're a podcaster as well. So I don't talk to a ton of podcasters. So that's an interesting thing, which we could talk a little bit about at some point. But I'm curious, you've just written your first novel, Smokebirds, a debut. What's it like getting this thing into the world? I mean, when you first saw it, when you first got it in the mail, like the pre-pub copies or whatever, what was it like to hold the thing in your hands?
I am actually going to the bookstore after we record to hold the actual book. I've seen like some galley copies that were not the same, and obviously got to see the interior from the PDF, but it hasn't even felt real yet until I actually am holding the book. And even then, frankly, I think I'm going to be petrified to open it because I think I'll find like 15 typos and feel very embarrassed about this book being in existence. But for the time being, it's all very exciting, and I can't wait to go to the bookstore after this and actually put my hands on it.
You write about this billionaire family that is kind of, I mean, think sort of something like Succession or something on steroids, right? So this family that has this major lumber company. You are the child of a billionaire. And that is an interesting thing because there's only a couple thousand billionaire, a couple, is it thousands or hundreds? There's a couple thousand, right? The Forbes list I just listened to.
There's not a lot of them.
Yeah, it's not a big club.
Unique creatures in the universe.
You could certainly fit them all in at a TED Talk or something, right?
I don't know if you'd want to attend that, but in the book, at least, they all hang out with each other. So there's a...
Yeah, growing up with that kind of money, I think it's just something that most people can't imagine, right? So, I mean, do you think it's more ordinary than people think? It actually is as unusual as people think. Do you find yourself like, oh my gosh, I did grow up in a different world? I mean, I read an interview you did where you talked about the absurdity of being at this prep school where you did a fashion show and these couple $1,000 outfits to raise scholarship money for the kids who were less privileged. I mean, what is it like? How do you explain to people that don't understand this kind of wealth what it's like?
I think on one hand, it's you have to acknowledge how strange it is that there are people in the world most people who live paycheck to paycheck and are constantly stressed about money. And there's a select group of people who it's no longer about, having enough or what the next house is going to be. It turns into a game of status where, your people you're hanging out with might have more or less. And that part of it is very bizarre. I think what's more ordinary than people would think, and I'm sure you would understand this, is it's so cliche to say money doesn't buy happiness. And again, I think at a certain point, not being stressed about money does buy a tremendous amount of happiness. But many of the people in this world, I think, and I hope I show this through the book, are still suffering immensely, right? No matter the status that they've achieved, there's so much insecurity. There's at times a lot of desperation. And I think part of that is just the human condition of you get to a certain point and you think, oh, I've made it. But then all of a sudden you're looking at Elon Musk, couple rungs ahead of you on whatever ladder that is, or this other person who's more relevant now that you're getting older and so on. And I just think that constant dissatisfaction that is so essential to what it means to be alive is as real in this world as any other. I mean, growing up, I think you're in a silo for sure. And I think so much of America, probably the world, exists in these spaces. And, I grew up in Silicon Valley, went to a very elite prep school, then went to Brown University. And you just exist kind of in these bubbles where you're not necessarily stretching to see what is it like actually out there? Like, how unique is this? After all, if your peers are all kind of running in similar circles, I think that's one, pretty dangerous just as a way to grow up. But number two, it's kind of tough to kind of think about, oh, this is really strange, right? When it's kind of all you know.
Yeah. You say money doesn't buy happiness, but it does. There's some studies I forget what the per capita correlate would be now, but several years ago, I remember David Brooks quoting the study that money buys happiness. At that time, it was up to about $75,000 a year.
Yeah,
So
that sounds right.
So from like 20,000 to 75,000, money makes a huge difference. But from like 500,000 to 50 million, it's not that big of a difference, right? The jump, once you get to a place where you have much more than you need, it's a law of diminishing returns, right? It just doesn't. And you write so well this despair and melancholy, right? That you have these. Yeah, the book. It's really well written, by the way. I mean, you turn a sentence incredibly well. The melancholy just drips from every page, right? And I mean, I remember at one point when I was reading it, there was this great. I wanted to ask you about this actually, because there's this great scene in the book. I think it's around page 53 or something, and Duke, who is the patriarch, the grandfather figure, he's being kind of insufferable. He's downing bourbons. He's got his own struggles, his health issues and things. And and he's facing mortality, and you're losing control of your legacy, and he and his son are just his son is finding him insufferable and just can't handle his antics, and you say that he loses it, and you say in that passage he'd never lost it before. That which I was sitting there thinking, this is amazing. So this isn't hours building. This is a lifetime building. I wanted to ask you, why at that moment at a resort in Hawaii, why is that the moment of reckoning that's been coming for decades?
I think that so Duke is the patriarch of this family. He considers himself self-made. In the book, that's somewhat of a gray area because even he had a leg up. And then he raises his kids.
When you said that, I thought of, because you said it was sort of in the book, you say it's kind of this well-kept secret or not so well-kept secret. I thought of Trump, right? I mean, this.
Yeah, I think that's right.
I mean, he only gave me a small, like $1 million loan. Okay, I mean, it's the idea of self-made.
Yeah, I want to answer your question too, but I just, on a tangent, I think that's such a core part of the book as you think about nepotism and privilege. It's just so many characters who want to feel like they made it themselves and get the respect for that. And even in the real world, right? Like, I have had so much frustration dealing with the idea from folks who were given everything. I am such a clear example of that, and yet feel this sense of so much pride as if, like, what's the colloquial line? Like they were given the opportunity, but they had to seize it. And at a certain point, you're given such a tremendous opportunity that you have to imagine tens of millions of people would also seize it if they were in that place. And I think for Duke, though, to go back to your question, he's at a point in his life where it's obvious that his career is coming to an end the way that it used to be. He's stepping back from the company. The board is forcing him to kind of put somebody else in charge. And now he's, for the first time, kind of going on this family vacation that he's avoided his whole life, really, sitting there face to face with his son and noticing that, like, one, I have a terrible relationship with my son, feeling that inside, looking around him and realizing this is what money has supposedly bought. This is what it's supposed to be good for. And yet I'm miserable. And I think that culmination of factors in a very, so I hope, like, darkly funny but tense dinner scene, which is in a version of Hawaii that is so obscure. Like, these people created their own rich person Hawaii that has nothing to do with the real Hawaii. And just the lack of reality in that case, just hitting him over the head as he's getting drunker and drunker, and coupled with self-loathing that he can't even see himself, right? He just has to project that because he doesn't have any of the ability to look inward and say, like, oh, why am I mad? Why am I angry? Maybe I should work on these things. No, it all has to be Richard's fault. It all has to be this family's fault for how he ended up here.
But Richard loses it at that point. I mean, Richard loses
Richard, I think both of them are kind of going back and forth.
Okay.
Right.
But I just wondered when you said that, I'm thinking, for something about the way you wrote that just made me think about how many instances Richard, the son of Duke, has been in this situation and not lost it, right?
I think Richard, he was one of my favorite characters to write. I mean, all of the characters in this book are pretty unlikable, which for some people is going to be to make it a tough read. There might be positive things you could find in some of them, and maybe we'll talk about Bella later. But a lot of people find her incredibly obnoxious as well. And Richard, he isn't necessarily the brightest guy. Like all the characters, is crippled by insecurity, has always grown up in his dad's shadow, wanting to kind of impress him and look up to him. And yet projects kind of this attitude around him to his family, to his peers, of this kind of prideful, like, I am a Peterson, I am a success story, I am good at what I do. And I think the evidence is pretty obvious that that might not be the case. And I think face to face with his dad, imagine growing up with someone like Duke for that long, bringing him to your family vacation, trying to make some sort of effort here to, to build a bridge, and yet just being faced with just so much resentment from that person that you want to look up to, that you want to appreciate you. I think when writing that scene, it's pretty tough to be in Richard's shoes and feel that.
It's interesting. There's a psychiatrist I've read a lot of, Frank Lake, and he, in a section of his magnum opus, which is like 1,000 pages long, he talks about early childhood development and what happens when you get acceptance as a gift or acceptance as a reward. And he says, it pretty early on. You're prelingual. I mean, you're just developing language, and if you're unconditionally accepted, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And not that you're not disciplined or anything like that, but that if you're loved, right, or if that acceptance is a reward for meeting whatever expectation. He says, if it's the latter, man, if it's a reward, it just does it's just such psychological violence, right? And that's, I mean, so much of the relationships which you write so well are people that all have no sense of acceptance as gift, right? They're all just striving to finally feel like they're okay, it seems.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, I don't know if there's a character in this book who is unconditionally loved or feels that. Every single person is so desperate for the approval of others, specifically their family in most cases. And maybe the younger kids, Emmett and Cole, get it to a degree from their parents, and Cole in particular is such a complex, terrible character for most of the book in terms of personality, but hopefully very interesting. But I think for Richard and Eliza, the growing up in a way where just they never had a chance to be good enough, particularly because a father figure who will always look down on them for what he feels like is taking his money and taking his success. And for them to always have that line over them, like, I built this, I made this myself. And therefore they have to always, no matter what they can try to do or build or succeed, they're never going to get their father's love, right? They're never going to get his approval. And if it's a reward, they're very small rewards. And like at times it's like, I was proud of you for this, or I was proud of you for that, but slivers in their relationship.
Do you feel like you got acceptance as gift growing up?
I do. I think what's difficult about writing this book, and I know part of the reason why it's going to be somewhat controversial as it plays on, like, I would never want my parents on a personal level to feel attacked. I mean, I think all of the worst characters in this book and their worst thoughts and the worst things they do, I like to think that those are the worst thoughts that I've ever had, the worst parts of myself, versus me trying to say, oh, this character is based on this person, or this character is based on that,
How do you get in touch with that? How do you stay with that? Because I'm guessing, I mean, I don't know what your creative process is like, but I'm guessing you've got to sit with the darkness a little bit. I mean, I don't know if you know the book, The Screw Tape Letters, but it's a book where C.S. Lewis is sort of imagining a devil.
I've heard about it. I haven't read it.
It's like this senior devil in hell giving, his nephew is like a junior demon. He's just in the corporation, and he's getting to ruin his first soul. And Lewis talks about how basically it took him months to recover from writing that book, because he had to sort of live in the mind of hell, like live in the mind of how darkness would ruin a human soul. How? I mean, did it when you found these dark parts of yourself, or when you had to nurse them because you sounds like you had some significant acceptance as a kid? How do you sit with those things long enough that you can write them?
I think that comedy and absurdity really helps. I think reflecting on my position as like, holy shit, I can swear on this show.
Yeah, oh, sure. This is of course. You can say whatever you want.
Yeah. Yeah. You're born into a type of world that 99.9 and then carry that decimal point as far as you want, like, is never going to see. And then yet I've also been blessed with just like the most incredible, crazy opportunities ever, and had, comparatively to most people, just such a leg up on the world, like an enormous leg up. And then you look at that and you ask yourself, how the hell am I deserving of any of this? Like, this is crazy that this happened to me. And then you think about all the times where you've ever had your ego attacked, where you've ever felt insecure. And I imagine to myself, like, that part of me that tries to find pride or tries to like feel like I deserve this or I do this. And I hate that part of me. And I think in these characters, a lot of that comes through. I mean, when I'm at my most self-realized, I like to really just honor the idea that, like, holy shit, I do not, like, deserve is such a tricky word. I do not feel like I deserve this stuff. I do not feel a lot of personal pride. And yet I can still look in the mirror and be like, what can I do to be a really good person and to make good art and to hopefully live a life that I could be proud of at the end of it? And that gray area, I think, is what really was exciting for me in exploring this book. Just all the contradictions. And fiction lets you do that in a way that if I wrote a nonfiction book, like How to Be a Good Nepo Baby or something, I would hate that. Like, it would be like, what a self-serving me on a pedestal telling people what to do, or like that. I would never write that book. But the novel lets you explore these things, I think.
Yeah, is that the difference between prescription and description? I mean, right? When like,
Yeah.
I kind of am allergic to prescriptive stuff. When somebody tells me don't walk on the grass, the first thing I want to do
You're
is
going
walk
right on the
grass.
grass.
Yeah. But I find description, and this is kind of why I think, like, good art doesn't scream morality, right? It's got to be kind of an undertone, right? Which, I mean, there's clearly morality in your book, right? I mean, you're not a morally insensitive guy, but it doesn't beat the reader over the head. I think that's moralistic novels, when they become Jeremiads or sermons. People don't want to read that, right? I mean, do you like? I don't like reading stuff like that.
No, I detest it. Anytime an author feels like they want to come in with a book and then, like, Sinclair the Jungle, like the last fifth of that book is just a full-on sermon of like, this is, after all this fiction up to this point, now I'm giving you the playbook on how we should think politically. And I think the novel should allow the reader to ask tough questions. And I don't think you have to have these answers. Like, I think every reader can come up with answers themselves, and the author might have a totally different answer or a totally different take than what a reader might have. And once the book's out there and people read that, I want to welcome that. And I think the best books, and I'm not saying I wrote one of the best books, but the very best literature out there really allows people to do that.
You know, it's interesting you talk about gratitude. It's not obvious, right, that privilege, I mean, it can hit people many ways, because you look at somebody like Herbert Hoover, who was not a man of means and was sort of into austerity, and it was sort of, if I made it, anybody can make it, which is very different than FDR, who got struck down with polio and realized and had an empathy for struggle, because he's like, he had everything, and yet he wasn't exempt from this kind of suffering, right? And so I guess privilege can put you, it can chart your course many ways. And it's interesting because Cole, I mean, I know you say he's sort of not likable, he's nebbishy, but he does have some noblesse oblige, right? I mean, he does have a sense of responsibility, that there's something admirable to that.
I think there are times where he maybe reaches for that. I think with Cole, though, Cole is one of the third generation. He's the oldest of the two brothers, and he kind of, in the book, somewhat betrays the family, is more leftist, wants to rebel against them. And you know, he communicates the right ideas at times. But I think what we find with his character is he really just doesn't care about anything. Like when you think about what ideals Cole has, and you know, he just wants to be liked. And it's so sad that he wants this girl to like him, Bella, and then eventually wants his family to like him again. And no matter where he is in the world or what he does, he just wants to be accepted. And he's totally willing to compromise any ideal, any idea, anything he fights for in order to achieve that. And
so you think that so this gets back to the acceptance reward stuff, right? So is that
yeah.
is it that like, he might have the seeds of some morality?
Yeah, that's a good way to say it.
But they don't get watered or they get choked out, right? Because Jesus has that great parable where the seeds and some of the seeds, you know, the sower scattering the seeds, and some of the seeds they get swept off, or some of them get on the rocks and they can't grow, right? These seeds of morality can't grow because there's no love, right? There's no sense of secure identity for anything. So I mean, so there's no. I guess when you have that much insecurity, it's hard for it's hard, I guess, to make space to love anybody, but because you're on the quest to love yourself, I guess.
Yeah, and I don't think any of these characters love themselves. And I think what we see with kind of where this, like, I think these seeds of morality could have been nurtured by good parenting. I think what we find in this book is a thread of bad parenting all the way down, beginning with Richard, then raising his kids, then Richard and Lily and Richard's wife, and Cole and Emmett's mother has her own parenting stories in the back with her mom. And it's just, nobody really breaks out of that cycle of self-reflecting. How can I do better than what my parents did before me, and so on. And I think the implications are you just have morally hollow characters, and Emmett too, but Cole kind of most pointedly, in that there's something there that maybe could have turned into someone who could have done something interesting or made a difference. But instead what we get is really a failed ability to change, or an inability to change.
Have you done some therapy?
I do therapy, and I've done a lot of like, and I sound like the classic Silicon Valley snob, but like Vipassana meditation retreats and stuff like that. So
I ask that because the degree to which the real antagonist or the real villain in the book, right, in some sense, is the lack of introspection, right? Is this way of being human.
Yeah.
That is just refuses to look in an emotional mirror, right? That just sort of rises off the pages, right? And it's the tragedy of the book, right? I mean, along with the environmental crisis and other things and the scandals. I mean, there are real more, but it's the thread that runs through all the tragedy, right? The people that can't. I mean, is that? Do you have close relationships with people like that, or like where does your? I mean, because you write with a familiarity, and for a guy who strikes me as introspective, you write the non-introspective quite well. Is that just imagination, or is that looking around in elite circles and just saying, God, will you just look at yourself for a second?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of the latter in there. I think when you write a novel, it's always really hard to kind of trace where do certain things come from. I've had talks where it's like, who's this character based on? Like, when did you see this in real life? And the truth is, like, when you start writing fiction, some stuff just appears, and it's from your deep subconscious coupled with experiences that you don't fully even remember. But what I've been around a lot is people who on paper have everything, and yet you interact with them for a short period of time, and you can just tell that there's a lot of stuff being buried, and the way they bury it can be totally different. Someone might drink a lot of alcohol. Someone might just refuse to be able to sit still for more than 5 minutes, or have their screen time on their phone is 18 hours a day. It's like they can't sit with themselves for any period of time because they're so scared of what might emerge and what they might see. And I think that's clear for these characters. Richard plays a ton of video games. Lily is obsessed with different supplements and drugs and wearables and anything that she thinks can make her happy. Emmett's also doing drugs. And Cole is kind of just really wants to respond to people in a way where they come back and say, Cole is such a good guy. We like Cole so much. We appreciate Cole. He's so different. And they're all just, they can't ever say like, oh, maybe I should work on myself before, before trying any of these things.
You're married.
I am married. Yeah.
I'm curious. So I was thinking about just the, you talked about the Nepo baby stuff, and I think about Kierkegaard has this metaphor of the king and the maiden, right? And this king sees this maiden, and he's so into her and so wants to be the object of her affections as well. But he's worried if he goes to her as a king that she can only love the king. She'll never love him, right? And he winds up being veiled, having to come to veiled, right? And it's interesting because for him, it's a metaphor, I think, of at least part of the applications are why God is veiled in the world, right? That can we really love God? Can you really love an omnipotent God, right? Or does God need to be powerless in order to be someone that can be loved? Did you think about that when you're courting your wife, when you're dating? You're like, God, do I want to? I mean, when do I tell her that I'm part of my family is part of a very elite club that shames the Skull and Bone Society? This is a small group of people that have this kind of wealth. I mean, did you have anxiety about that?
I met my wife when we were so young. We were like freshman hallmates at school. She's from Hawaii. She grew up with her parents were tour guides in Hawaii, which is interesting for the Hawaii angle of this book because I got to visit her friends and family and thought about what it would look like if someone from California just showed up in Hawaii and decided to create their own space, which is, again, like just a Disneyland version of Hawaii. I think it's always been, I can imagine if like my wife and I like separated or I never met her, what it would be like dating today. And I do think you just want to find genuine people. And the cool thing about our relationship is we were friends first. She saw me I'm 30 now, but since I was 18 years old. So I think I've changed a lot and she's changed a lot and she's seen that growth and being together for that long and watching that. I think that's been really helpful to our relationship. I don't know how I would date today. On one hand, this is the only time ever, Scott, where writers can actually get women because they can go on these dating apps and write really good things. So I feel like I missed my chance to use the only superpower I could have.
I'm still waiting for the day where podcasters get women.
It's coming.
I'll be dead. I'll be dead. I get a better chance of seeing Social Security at this point. Yeah, no, I don't think that's actually a thing. But yeah, no, but I mean, what do you? I mean, when you're friends, I mean, what was it like when you told her, like, you're eating bad lasagna I don't know if maybe they have good lasagna at Brown, but or you're sitting in the cafeteria, what does your dad do? Yeah, he's a billionaire. I mean,
I think I'm so personally, I would never, like, one of the hardest parts about coming out with this book and doing press like this is I have to talk about myself and talk about this in a way that just makes me deeply uncomfortable, in the sense that I never want it to come across like I'm from this better class, or I'm like part of this world that I want to be exclusive and you don't belong here. And of course, the headlines for a lot of these articles are going to read, son of a billionaire writes a book critiquing his own class, or he's against, like, and one, like, that sucks for my parents who have been very supportive of this book. I do never want to attack anybody personally. And on the other hand,
that's what I like about you, actually. What's interesting is that you don't seem, this does not come from, this is true fiction in the sense of you don't seem to loathe where you come from, right? It wasn't an unusually traumatic experience, and we all, it's a broken world, right? And so we all, none of us have perfect parents or perfect, but you come from, it seems like you said before, more on the gift, the acceptance as gift than the reward side of the ledger. And so that's what's interesting to me, is that
I could see it it could have gone wrong, and you can imagine that, and you grow up around enough people where maybe it did come wrong. I think did go wrong. I think one of the things that I just noticed, that always the people who, again, like, were so lucky in life, many of the peers around me, and just have this sense of the ego coming purely from that. Like, the worst case is that genetic side of like we were somehow born better. Like when that's there, that's particularly nefarious. But even the other side of just it's this exclusivity where they would never marry someone outside of their social class, or they don't want to hang out with friends outside of that. And even if it's subtle and even if it's kind of buried deep down, I still find that it's just another example of how siloed these become. Like in the past, right? When you had a community like in a small town, like the wealthiest people would also attend the church with the people in the town, and they would give to the church, and there was a commingling and an interaction. And today, and in this book, that doesn't need to happen at all anymore. You can exist as a very privileged person and never talk to or interact with the 99%, except when you're, I don't know. Now you can take a Waymo, so you don't have to be in an Uber, but go into, maybe for your barber or something like that. And just that complete separation, I find very scary and disheartening for maybe this country.
You that's interesting that you brought this up about the people that used to be in the common parish, right? The rich and the poor. One of the things that struck me as a reader is that there's not a lot of spiritual conversation among the family, right? You don't get the sense that they're, I went to graduate school in Pittsburgh, and the Mellons, the Carnegies, they're endowing these big churches, right? They're in church every week. There is this sort of religiosity among the WASPs, and the Petersons strike me as WASPy. I mean, they're certainly not Jews, but the WASPiness doesn't translate into a lot of religiosity in the book. No, is that a West Coast thing? I mean,
I think it's a take on California and the dilution of spirituality in Silicon Valley. I think if there are references made to Lily and Patricia talking about meditation,
right? There is the meditation,
right, or like the drugs they might take, like the spiritual experiences from psychedelics, or there's VCs on a panel who talk about cold plunges and saunas and all. I think that there's a move where we've kind of spirituality has been taken into a place where it's been productized and then it's been sold as just another self-help strategy. And I think that if anything, they look for that. They just want to feel better. And they're kind of taking the easiest pill that they can take in all the cases to do that. And that's their kind of spiritual belief in this book.
Yeah, that's interesting to me that I wonder how much of that sort of spirituality, I mean, it can ground you, certainly, right? Obviously. But I mean, if there's, I wonder the difference of having something where there's, like Martin Buber talks about the I thou, where you've got a divine thou that can say no, right? That can say no to excess, right? That speaks through prophets. Where I wonder, look, I like doing yoga and stuff like that, but I wonder about that. Is it easier to be, I guess, maybe at least for your characters, they can do this stuff and not seem to get spiritual benefit from it, right? People go to church and don't get spiritual benefits. Gosh, I mean, not to be too partisan, but go to a Trump rally. But all apologies to my Trump listeners, but Trump supporting listeners. But that's interesting. The spiritual stuff they do doesn't seem to take, right?
I think you were right to reflect on your earlier point that any spiritual practice they do is just devoid of introspection. Like there's never the opportunity to kind of sit with something greater than yourself. All they have is themselves and their own brains, and then they have to distract those brains endlessly because, God forbid, they sit too long and they kind of see what's actually there.
You say something early in the book when Bella is introduced, and this is his love interest, and she's this African-American woman, and she's brilliant and hardworking and could be manipulative and jockeying for, she's also in the rat race. Everybody here's in the rat race. Of some kind or another, right? And you say something there, that she saw the world as it is, broken and unjust. And that sentence, there's something about clear sentences, right? I mean, as a writer, right? Just that sentence struck me as very clear. It's short and spoke volumes. Is that how you see the world, as broken and unjust?
I think if you watch the news, it's especially lately, it can be hard not to. I think that what isn't communicated in this book is that generally I am more optimistic about people. I am not optimistic about these characters. These are some vile examples of what can happen to humanity when it's gone wrong. But I do think there's a lot of goodness in the world, and there's a lot of really good people. And I think sometimes there are systems that exist in this world where those good people might not always get the chance to live a life where they're not constantly stressed and constantly worried. And there's just, we're stuck with these brains that are always going to create some base level of suffering unless you work really hard and sometimes you work really hard and all you find is you have to be okay with that suffering. And so I guess to answer your question, I don't know if I see the world through any of the characters' perspectives. I don't know whose point of view that was. It was either Cole's or Bella's. Either Cole thinking about like
I think it was Cole, I think as I recall, it was Cole describing.
Yeah, so he would have seen it. Like he's reflecting a lot in that. Again, with a fiction book, right? People are always like, Daniel wrote this, so he thinks that like it's these characters that I think. And for Cole to see that in Bella, he is pushing for this ideal of like he knows something's wrong with himself. He has that self-loathing. He kind of pushes it out on the world around him, and he thinks that he and Bella are the same. That she also sees it the way he sees it, and therefore, and he can show her, and then he can find a way to seduce her. So it's very manipulative and short-sighted. But I think they're all hinting on like, and Bella's character especially notices that there's a lot going wrong here with climate, and there's a lot going wrong here with the attitudes that the very wealthy people like the Petersons might have around this issue. And I think some of that is very fair. I think it's really hard right now to be a pure optimist about everything that's happening in America or everything that's happening globally when we have so many crises. But I still think you can be optimistic that many individuals are going to do the right thing and are set up for goodness if we give them that chance.
Did you have a morbid feeling? I mean, you wrote this book, Smokebirds, and it's a great title, right? Because it's a play on snowbirds, right? Where we get these toxic California fires. Just even the privilege doesn't have to deal with natural disaster the way everybody does this, right? You can kind of go and just go to Hawaii or whatever. But I mean, wow, to have a debut novel just months after the fires. I mean, not that you can plan that, right? Exactly. I mean, at some weird point, you're going to think, wow, I mean, I kind of lucked out on that one. But I mean, it's interesting. Has the book gotten more attention because it's just interesting. We've just lived through I mean, tragic fires, the kind that you knew as a Californian, but I think the rest of the nation, it's sort of new. It's new in our consciousness at this level.
I think in 2020 in San Francisco, we had just horrible fires close by, and it was like the sky was orange and it was apocalyptic, and that's when like many people started thinking, how do we get out of here? Like, how do we escape? What's our plan so we don't have to breathe this smoke? And of course, it's the people who have the most money and privilege. They can leave for 3 months. Similar thing in COVID, like who can really work from home, right? Versus the people that have to go in. And so I knew and it's starting to happen so much more. And fires are also just such a complicated issue. Like there's a lot politically and then technologically that we can probably do to make these less likely. Of course, like clearing brush in the forest and making sure that we have better sensors and making sure we don't make human errors. But we also know the earth is getting warmer.
Don't build where there's lots of fires.
Yeah. And you know, it's getting warmer and warmer. And so these fires are going to be, and it's just, living in California, this is just going to become more and more the reality. And it's going to be true. I mean, when writing the book, it started a while ago. And then there were fires in Hawaii. And all of a sudden it was like, oh, like in Maui now, like my people are supposed to escape and go somewhere where there's not going to be fires. And now on the front page of the news, there's a giant, horrible fire in Maui. And that, like, I had to change the location to Kauai to make it so I didn't have to deal kind of with that story so late in the process.
There's a discussion that takes place in it's early middle of the book, and I just want to read it if that's okay. There's a discussion where they're talking about taxation, and it says now Harold was speaking to himself more than Emmett. Why would any businessman worth his salt build in America? Every incentive is broken, every single one. It's appalling. Mrs. Dean shivered when she spoke. Her voice was bird-like. And the left wants to get rid of cap gains, the engine of innovation, the only incentive we have left. It's so stupid. Mrs. Dean shivered again. Harold swallowed his lobster tail and then coughed. It's socialism. Everywhere. We work hard and create thousands of jobs. And what do we get in return? Higher taxes, the nation's spite. That's the worst part. The spite. I pay the taxes, but does it help? The spite? No. They're an insatiable mob. They're insufferable. Insufferable, chirped Mrs. Dean. Why would I work? What's possibly in it for me, for us? I tell you. He slurped another forkful of lobster. Your comments about the lobster are great. Well, this conversation's going. The world is going to utter shit. Have you heard conversations like this among the elite crowd you grew up in, like this about taxation? I mean, this is
yeah. I mean, this is partly slightly histrionic and hyperbolic, and it's comedic. Like, I want this book to be entertaining and darkly funny too. So I think like these scenes set that up in a way that maybe I haven't been in that exact experience, but these conversations around taxes and what we can do to avoid taxes and why we have to pay taxes. And in San Francisco, people feeling like we pay so much in taxes, but our city is going to shit. Like, go on Twitter, we're living in a hellhole. I mean, there's just so much dissatisfaction. And I often feel like the solutions aren't always there. And I think this is true for, we see the behavior on both sides of the aisle, where when there's a problem so big, it's just this idea that you want to leave. And the character speaking in that section there, he kind of is talking about he's eventually just going to leave America and go somewhere else where he doesn't have to do this. And I find that pretty tragic. And I've heard that, like, we should literally escape so that we don't have to deal with this, instead of let's stay in our country and try to make it better. Right.
It's interesting. My conservative friends will tell me, they're reflective and smart ones. It will say, look, that what the super rich or the very wealthy are saying is it's not like they're going to stop working. It's not like they're going to say, but really what will happen is when you tax at a certain level, they'll just hide money. They'll defer income, right? That there's this real, I mean, they would say part of the art for the challenge of raising taxes is when you raise it to a point where the wealthy, it's not like they're going to stop trying to make money, but what they'll do is make it in ways and hide the income and defer income in other ways out of this kind of resentment and other things. And that it's complicated, right? I mean, these things like taxation, how you redistribute resources in society is complex, right? And how you make incentive structures and things like that, it is complex, right? And I think, which it doesn't seem like there's room for that in public life, like nuanced conversation about motivation and wealth.
No, you're right. Like the issue politically is, you can say, look, we want higher taxes. There's this 1% who own this disproportionate amount of wealth and so on. But the mechanisms to kind of protect that through trust, through there's things called grats. That's this whole world where it's like, how do we not have to borrowing against your assets, of course. And also the idea, like, what's going to happen if California raises its taxes to 70%? You're going to have just many more people going to different places in the US where they don't have state tax, right? And then eventually, if the US were to do that, I bet they're going to be a lot like the character you just read, and they're going to move away too. And that's because it's just, there's no personal connection that the wealthy have with where their tax dollars are going. And a lot of this you can blame, I think, figures on the left and others. And I'm not a political pundit, and I don't, but just from them, I know the conversation is, my taxes are going to bullshit. Why would I pay this? And there's no connection to their community. They don't care that they're funding this program or that program to help these people, because they don't see any of it. They just see, like, I feel like I worked really, really hard, and now I'm forced to give my money away.
It's interesting in your book, you have this generational thing. You have the builders, right? Duke is the builder. you have his son. His son is the maintainer, right? And his son, and I guess sister. They're the maintainers, and then you have the kids, the grandchildren, who are very different, right? I mean, they're disconnected from the legacy in some ways, right? They're neither the builders nor the maintainers. In some sense, they're the beneficiaries, right? They're much more the beneficiary column than either builders or sustainers, right? I mean, have you seen this pattern in sort of in the as a it's so funny. Before I read your book, I never heard the term nepo baby or nepo. I wasn't even in my vocabulary. So there you go. You've introduced it. But
I taught you a new word. That's great.
You did. It's fantastic. Have you seen that pattern that you write about play out among people of immense wealth?
I think that what happens is there might be somebody who created a lot of wealth, and then the next generation is kind of being mentored and a part of that. And then it gets, you get later and later. And I think there are examples where somebody either squanders the fortune or, I do think it's more complicated in reality. I mean, I think that there's mechanisms that the very wealthy families can create so that their money can continue to grow in crazy ways, and they can protect themselves against the estate tax. And so that you do have these families, some of them have been wealthy for generations upon generations that exist in the world. And that's like very old money that has been passed down. But I do think what can happen is just a lack of motivation as you get further down that lineage, where if you grow up with so much and then your ego is being boosted so much by how great you are because of how you grew up, you start to kind of lose the idea of what do I want to contribute to society? Like society owes me everything, and it's proven that by giving me everything. And now, like, my responsibility is to go to a couple charitable events and put on a good face and get some good press for that. But, living my life in a very hedonistic, kind of excessive manner.
The backdrop for the book is this. I mean, the drama is real. I mean, the payoff is really, in my mind, is the exploration of this family. But it is, climate does drive the thing with these fires, and there are some ethical business quandaries that the Peterson Development Corporation has responsibility in the fire, and we find that early on, and how you deal with that. But that is the issue of issues, right? Climate, in that if there's no sustainable life for human beings, what does class struggle matter? What is anything? What is funding for the arts matter? I mean, on some level, this is the issue of issues, right? I mean, is it that way for you? I mean, is this sort of the thing that makes your heart beat as far as issues we face in the world?
There's a episode of Aaron Sorkin's Newsroom where they get like a climate study that is just so disastrous that it's like saying like, this is what's like worst case scenarios and this is all going to happen. And they don't even know how to present this in a segment. It's just the minute we as people hear such bad news, we just tune it out. And they really struggle in this newsroom to figure out, like, how are we going to have a segment that people are going to find approachable, and what can we give for good news? And the guy who's being interviewed is just like, we don't have any good news. There's no good
I remember
news.
He says, is there anything? He says, oh, no, we're way past the
nothing.
No, there's nothing we can do.
I worry about that with climate and climate change in general. I think there were some other, there's a book called An Uninhabitable Earth, and there's been other great climate nonfiction and reporting about this. And you read that and you just look outside and you're like, everything's okay. Like, until there's tons of smoke in the air. And the truth is, I think, like, people, especially in this book, the wealthy people are going to be fine. Like, they're going to find ways to get around this, and they're going to be the most insulated from it. And the people who are going to be most, especially in the short and medium term, damaged by this are going to be globally people outside the US who, the water is rising to such a point to make the place they're living inhabitable. And then you have people in the US who have to live in air polluted conditions because of fires or other issues that are coming up, just massive heat. So, but like, humans are resilient.
Does your dad have a spot for you in a bunker somewhere?
We do
you
not
have
have
a
a bunker. I was
You don't have
hoping
a
I could
bunker?
join you in your bunker. So that was my
How
real.
can you have this? How can your dad? Your dad needs to talk to me. Look, you can be a perfectly moral person and give to all the right causes, but you should have a bunker. Zombie
I think if
apocalypse,
there's
climate
Armageddon,
change.
I don't want to live in that world. I think I'm ready to go out fighting.
We need
And
rebuilders. You're a good
okay,
guy. We need good people to kind of repopulate the earth. You need a bunker. I
I'll
feel
consider
like
it.
that. Sponsor me. We're going to need communicators and podcasters to facilitate communication.
I think
in
we
new
are the most important. Yes,
We
I think
are.
they should have podcasters first, and the engineers and doctors like a
Tell
tier
your
below.
dad we need a bunker for the future of podcasting. I mean, that would be, yeah. No, I mean, it is right. This existential crisis, right? I mean, where you think about the capacity. I mean, so interesting, right? Being human, which other species just can't do. I don't think anyway. I mean,
Yeah.
To contemplate causing your own extinction is such a fascinating thing about being a human being, right? We can think about it. You can write about it. You can write about a phenomena in a novel that could possibly end civilization. I mean, how weighty is that?
It feels weighty to be able to do it as a human. What I think I'm more cynical about is this idea that somehow like this art is going to make a big difference. I think as people, we feel so powerless with something as big as climate change. And when you ask people like, oh, what can you do? It's like, you should recycle and use less AC, and you should try to give a portion of your paycheck to these organizations. And they just kind of feel like this is all going to hell anyway. Why do I have to do this? Or why should I do this? And the fact is, like, most of the problems are probably coming from folks and businesses and corporations way outside of their control, or even in some cases outside of the country. Like, how do you unite humanity around something like this? I think it's very difficult, but I do think it's fascinating that we as people kind of know that this stuff is coming. And we know that, look, nuclear war is a possibility, that climate change getting worse and worse and creating worse conditions is a clear possibility, if not a likelihood. And we just have to distract ourselves from that. We have to watch TV, and we have to go on our apps, and we have to read great fiction unrelated, because it sucks to think about that all the time. And I'm in the same boat.
Yeah, it is weird, right? Because I think we're probably the first generation or first generations in the 20th century post-nuclear weapon, and then with climate change, then subsequent to that can contemplate, yeah, we might end the species, right? I mean, just no other human being. And I wonder what that, I mean, I think, right, you either think human being is a fixed, that human nature is kind of a constant, or that you're maybe with Heidegger or something that thinks that human nature is a more pliable thing. And I just wonder what that does to the experience of being human, to know that and maybe you're right. Maybe that's where all the self-medication comes from, because that's something that we bear, right? That nobody, I mean, the stuff you're dealing with in this novel, no other generation, no other part of the human family has ever had to existentially struggle with.
Yeah. And I do think for our brains that developed thinking so short term, where can I get food? Where can I procreate? Where can I do to survive so I don't get killed? And now all of a sudden to be faced with these big picture thoughts of where is humanity going? I think philosophically we can connect to that and talk about that. But on a moment to moment level, I think there are some ideas that are just too big for us to fully grasp the implications of.
Well, it's something that we should think about and talk about. And I would encourage my listeners, if you're looking for a way to get into the crisis of our time, pick up Smokebirds. It's a great book. You will love it. And it might lead to some introspection if you're as dysfunctional as I am. It was a great mirror into some of my own psychoses. Thanks for writing the book, Daniel. It's great. And thanks for spending some time talking with me about it.
I'm so glad you liked it. Yeah, thanks for reading it, and thanks for doing this.